and perfect. This recording will be sent in a follow-up today, as well as the slides. Just as a note of housekeeping, welcome everyone to the National Girls Collaborative Project webinar, Scaling STEM Equitably, Practitioner-Driven Reflections and Emerging Guidelines. My name is Tara Cox, and I am the Senior Manager of Programs and Partnerships at NGCP. And we're going to be getting started. But before we dive in, just a few quick logistics. If you need auto-generated captions, they are available as you need them. Please use the chat throughout to ask questions and share your thoughts. We love an active chat, but we do request that you stay muted today so that we can hear our speakers. If this is your first time joining us for an NGCP event, which I see a lot of familiar faces and some new faces, so welcome. I wanted to share some background on who we are and what we do before we meet our speakers. The vision of the National Girls Collaborative Project is to support and create STEM experiences that are as diverse as the world we live in. NGCP is a national network of diverse stakeholders who are advancing the agenda of gender equity. We bring together organizations committed to informing and encouraging girls to consider STEM. Our goals: we believe that STEM skills can be acquired by anyone and fostered in everyone. Our initiatives build confidence and create a community of lifelong STEM activators. We have three central goals: to build and sustain a network of advocates to provide equitable and inclusive STEM opportunities, to catalyze equity in STEM from research to practice by providing actionable knowledge that transforms the STEM experience, and to increase our collective impact by strengthening organizational effectiveness. You can learn more about our mission and goals at our website, ngcproject.org, and you'll be seeing links to all of the relevant resources coming in the chat from Amanda. We have lots of resources to share with you. These are just a few that we're going to be highlighting today. First is our webinar series, which you are at today, one of the webinars, monthly webinars that range from topics like this one. We also have an e-newsletter that you are welcome to sign up for to be first to learn about NGCP events, and Amanda just put a link in the chat for that. And then our website is a great place to find exemplary practices, research, statistics, and more. Okay, we have a fully packed webinar today with lots to share, so I'm going to dive in to telling you about our speakers. Our first speaker, Emily Early, is the Senior Program Manager at NGCP, and she's co-PI of the project that we're going to be featuring in the webinar today. Erin Stafford is a Project Director at the Education Development Center and also co-PI on the project. Sheila James is a STEM consultant from the Ohio Afterschool Network and has been a collaborator on this project since the beginning. And April Caldwell is the Chief Program Officer of Girls Inc. of NYC and has also been a collaborator on this project since it started. Welcome to our speakers, and you can learn more about them in a blog post that will follow up this webinar that has more details on their bios. Okay, let's dive in. So today we're going to be discussing a few topics in regards to STEM education. So I just wanted to ground us in two central areas that we're going to be exploring today. The first is informal STEM learning, or STEM learning that happens outside of the formal classroom, in settings like libraries, after-school programs, museums, and other community-based spaces. And I see in the chat that many of you represent these amazing informal organizations that we'll be talking about today. Research tells us that 95% of learning happens outside of school, and that these informal learning spaces are pivotal in developing positive STEM attitudes, identities, and pathways in adults. So thank you for all of the work that you're doing. The second topic that we're going to be discussing today is program scaling. And we thought it was important to provide our definition, our working definition for scaling. For us, scaling is the process of taking a curriculum or program that has shown positive impacts in one context and spreading, replicating, or reproducing it in other informal learning contexts to reach more people and maximize impact. So today we're talking specifically about scaling in informal STEM learning spaces. The National Girls Development Project, the National Girls Collaborative Project and Education Development Center, have been supporting and studying scaled-up STEM programs for decades through initiatives like partnering with the Franklin Institute to scale and evaluate their signature program, Leap into Science, a science and literacy program in Philadelphia. Emily, if you want to go to the next slide. Thank you. This just shows the plethora of programs that we've worked on both at EDC and NGCP to support scaling. So Leap into Science was a program that started in Philadelphia and scaled to 20 states with NSF funding. So in our work together in these various initiatives that you see here, we began to uncover how complex and challenging and sometimes inequitable scaling programs can be in the informal STEM learning space, where, as we know, no two organizations, locations, communities, educators are alike. In September of 2022, NGCP and EDC were given funding by the National Science Foundation to advance the conversation on scaling national informal STEM programs via a conference grant designed to elevate the voices of those often left out of the conversation. The program implementers that work directly with children and families to implement these scaled initiatives. We are very grateful to the NSF for their generous support. And to tell you more about this project and activities, I'm going to pass it to Erin Stafford.
Thanks, Tara. So how did we go about doing this? In May 2023, we brought together about 40 or so folks through hosting a 3-day conference. And the goal of the conference was to collectively challenge and redefine the conversation related to how we scale informal STEM programs through the lens of equity and inclusion, and grounded in the perspectives of program implementers, as Tara had just said. This was central, as these are the voices that are usually missing in conversations around scaling. Folks who are closer to the ground, youth and families who are part and participating in these projects. The objectives of the conference were to interrogate current conceptions of scale, especially those that tend to emerge from the formal K-12 research world, identify approaches and principles to equitably scaling, and then develop products to support the field. And this is a really important point as well, as the objective of this project was not just to get together and have some conversations and, talk about things we're frustrated with or barriers or opportunities. The goal of the project was to engage in dialogue and exercises that then emerged into creating a set of resources that could help the field more broadly, beyond the people who were just attending the conference. The idea was to help empower those on the ground who are having conversations about scaling every day and how they could be part of the process more actively. Our goal is not to provide a step-by-step or how-to guide for how you can scale your STEM program. I'm sorry if that's what you're here for today. That is not what we're going to provide. But instead, we're here to talk about the issues, challenge those notions that scale has to be done in a particular way. And most importantly, talk about ways that you can be empowered or empower those around you, particularly those who are not heard from, to participate in these conversations around scale. As Tara said, our goal was to empower program implementers, but the second real focus of this project was around equity. And we have a collaborator who is near and dear to our heart that says, if you don't tell me what equity means, I know it doesn't mean anything to you. And so for the purposes of this project, equity is defined as the process of consistently reflecting on, evaluating, and disrupting broader systemic barriers and biases that implicitly and explicitly exclude people from participating and thriving. So the important part is the process. And this guided our thinking, not only in the products that we're going to talk about today, but how we made every decision along the way, who attended, the content of the conference, et cetera, et cetera. We invited participants from across the diversity of informal STEM practitioners in job focus and career, gender, geography, race, ethnicity, and made particular effort to invite those who serve populations systemically excluded and historically marginalized in STEM, including girls, youth of color, Indigenous youth, youth with disabilities, and neurodivergent youth. You'll see our lovely folks who attended the conference right there on the screen right now. Participants also included learning and equity-focused researchers, funders, evaluators, although, as I said, they were not the central focus of the conversation, as sometimes they tend to be. And instead, the conversations evolved around those who are closer to the ground. It was important to us that we had that range of voices in the room. And so we worked with folks to really find people that we don't typically work with every day, even though we do this, and used a nomination process to have people come that we didn't know. And so we really got an interesting mix. Co-design was central. We formed a planning committee. Many of them are on this call today. Shout out to all y'all. We wanted to have them create something that they wanted to talk about and they knew their colleagues wanted to talk about. We wanted to create a space to have authentic conversations around power, outcomes, funding, all that stuff that's really hard to talk about that nobody ever talks about, but that is so central. And then at the conference, our activities were really driven and co-facilitated by our participants. So instead of us leading, it really was the folks who were part of it who were. So I hope I'm conveying how much the process of the conference was as important to what you're going to see today as the actual products that developed. So through the conference, a range of small and large group activities. Emily, if you want to go to the next slide, that really focused on exploring current models and then imagining new approaches. We sought to imagine how would informal STEM program development and implementation look different if we really centered equitable strategies and considered scale from the start of a program. And on the screen right now are some graphic notes from those sessions. Shout out to anybody who can graphic note take. That is a special skill. So, and very cool to watch. So just something to keep in mind. Through these conversations, key themes emerged, which really guided the products that were developed. One, equitably scaling informal STEM programs requires establishing an equal balance of power between those funding, developing, implementing a program. It can't just be driven by program developers and funders. Making decisions for others, youth and family have to be a part of it. Two, it involves authentic collaboration and relationship with building with communities prior to thinking about scaling, and authentic being a very key term there. Prioritizing flexibility and locally culturally relevant adaptations, not strict fidelity or holding on to the model. And it considers the values, needs, and interests of each community in defining its success. And as an evaluator, this is one that you really have to think about and wrap your mind about. But that communities should be involved in redefining and refining what is successful. So overall, while participants were not always convinced that scale was the answer, there was agreement about the need to think about resources differently. And so what we sought to do was create resources, tools, and interventions to do that. Conversations were hard, energizing, intense, but really at the end of the day, the point was to come together and think about conversations that had been being had, but just not together. And so we sought to do that, and we sought to open a space to create this conversation to continue. So building on these themes and the momentum, we sought to develop the products through a co-developed process. And with that, I will hand it over to Emily to talk about what that meant.
Thanks so much, Erin. So as Erin mentioned, after the conference, we really came away with a new understanding of how we wanted to move forward with developing these resources for the informal STEM field at large. And we knew we couldn't do it alone. We knew that co-design was such an integral part of our project, from co-designing the conference to co-leading the conference. So we knew that the products also had to be developed alongside the people we've been having these discussions with since the beginning. So we brought together 3 groups of collaborators who had been part of the conference originally. One group to help us or work with us to co-develop what we at first were calling a white paper for equitably scaling STEM programs. A second group that we co-developed a tool with for equitable scaling. And then a third group of reviewers who would both review the resources and also provide feedback throughout the process. And these groups met over about 5 months with us to reflect on the conference learnings, reflect on the conversations we had had at the conference, and ultimately begin developing these resources that would help bring others into this conversation, just like you all here with us today. We went through many drafts of the resources. We tried some things, threw some things against the wall, saw what would stick, tried some other things, and then came up with 2 resources finally that have really been designed for anyone interested in equitably scaling STEM programs and curricula, including but not limited to program developers, implementers, researchers, evaluators, and funders as well. So the 2 resources we want to share with you today, you can see them up on your screen there, are called the Guidelines for Equitably Scaling Informal STEM Programs and the Collaborative Decision-Making Tool for Equitably Scaling Informal STEM Programs. I'm going to go to the next slide to introduce the guidelines first. The guidelines are outline the contextual issues around scaling informal STEM programs. They discuss the limitations of current frameworks for scaling, and then ultimately provide 6 guidelines drawn directly from the conference themes and learnings that Erin talked about to consider when you're equitably scaling. And I'm just going to go through these 6 guidelines right now. We're going to talk about them in a little bit more detail when we have the panel portion of this webinar today. Sheila and April are going to talk about how they've used these guidelines or how they're thinking about them in practice. But the 6 guidelines are to proactively build authentic relationships with the educators, youth, and families you aspire to reach. Collaboratively determine whether to scale alongside these educators, youth, and families. Determine together what will be scaled, how, and with whom. Redefine program success by co-defining or refining goals and outcomes. Prioritize flexibility over fidelity by collaboratively deciding what is essential to the program model and what can be adapted. And then finally, empower participants through capacity building and iteration. And then the collaborative decision-making tool that was also developed, the second resource, is really a companion guide for the guidelines for anyone who's interested in implementing these in your practice. So it's a 4-step guide, as you can see on the screen there, excuse me, to help practitioners identify who you want to collaborate with and build relationships with them, determine together with those people whether to scale, determine together with those people how to scale, and then reconvene regularly to check in, discuss, iterate, and make decisions as a group. So I also want to just mention here before we dive into the panel that these resources are not designed to be how-to guides for equitable program scaling. We really view this as the beginning of this conversation and know that we don't hold all of the answers. This is a conversation that we want to welcome you into. We would love your feedback. As you view the resources, as you hopefully use them in your practice, we're interested in your feedback. And these resources were developed to empower people to talk about the issues and opportunities that scaling presents and to ask critical questions of one another. So I'm now going to pass it back to Erin to talk with April and Sheila about how they've been involved in this project, including how they've started to use these guidelines and the decision-making tool in their practice.
Thank you, Emily. For those of you out in the world beyond, if you want to start thinking of your questions and put anything in the chat, please feel free. We will have some Q&A, but I do want to dive in to the folks who do this work every day. Good to see you, Sheila and April. Thanks for being here with us and for offering to share your experiences. We've talked a lot up to this point about scale in the abstract, and we've gone through the guidelines and the tool. But I want to hear about what this means for you on the ground, and I'm sure a lot of people on this call do. So let's talk a little bit about who you all are and what brings you to this work. April, let's start with you. Who are you? What brings you to this topic? And why was it so important for you to be a part of this conversation about scale?
Well, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be a part of this conversation. This has been such an incredible team to work with. So I'm so excited to just have this conversation with you all. My name is April Caldwell. I'm the Chief Program Officer at Girls Inc. of New York City. I lead everything from program, design, strategy, and implementation. Just to give you a context, we service over 10,000 girls in New York City, and we're in about 160 schools, and we offer comprehensive programming that is implemented during the school day and after school. And so this project and being a part of it was really important to me because, one, we do a lot of STEM-based programming, but in my work, since I do a lot of strategy and design and development, I work in conjunction with our development partners, our fundraising and grant making. And so for us, what we were starting to see was so many new programs being pushed from funders, right, in terms of programs that they wanted to scale, that we were also noticing we're not really engaging for the students. We weren't really getting that, level of impact. And then the same was happening internally as we were thinking of creating programs. And so being able to be a part of this project has really helped inform the work moving forward. And I would say be much more intentional about how we are developing and designing programming.
Thanks, April. Sheila, your role is a little bit different. So why don't you tell us a little bit of background on you and what brings you to the conversation and being a part of this with us?
Hey, y'all. I am Sheila, and I am the STEM education consultant for the Ohio Afterschool Network. And that involves a lot of coaching, training, mentoring, and just working with programs across the state on implementing informal STEM. I feel totally blessed and privileged to have been brought into this project from the beginning and utilizing skills and information from previous endeavors when thinking about scale. Because if you have not heard this yet, let me share with you today. Ohio has now received the tagline of the Midwest Silicon Valley. We have everybody and then some coming into Ohio and wanting to implement STEM. So this tool for me has just been going through the whole process when we met as a group and talking through it. It's like, how you know something and you try to share it, but you don't really have the words or the tool to share. This was that piece for me. Sharing with people the importance of making sure that everyone has a seat at the table. And when thinking about Ohio, we have rural areas, we have urban areas, we have suburban areas. So you've got all of these folks who really want to do STEM, but I am so excited that now I have these tools that I can go, hold up, wait a minute. Here's some things that we need to think about, to talk about, and to just sort of ponder before we begin going and sprinkling STEM dust all over the state. So this has been just like the flour in my cake, just being able to have all of the ingredients that I need to make that perfect cake for the youth in our state.
So both of you mentioned other forces around you that might be influencing what gets implemented with youth and families. Why, for you, do you think it's important to include the voices of implementers or youth or families in these actual early conversations about what is going to get scaled, if something is going to scale, and what that looks like? Sheila, do you want to go first?
Sure. Well, I mean, there's the old adage, everything isn't for everybody. And even though we have the best intentions and we want everyone to partake and be a part of it, we have to have these initial conversations. In the field in general, we often talk about professionalism. And how, we want our OST staff to be professionals. Well, part of being professional is bringing them into the conversations so that they feel like professionals. They are the front line. They are working directly with our families. They're working directly with our youth. They have insight. So being able to bring them to the table to hear, because sometimes they hear things that the families are saying or feeling, or they know what's going on in the community where our funders or program directors, might not know. So bringing them into the space and getting firsthand, one, what works, what doesn't work. Two, what the needs are of the communities that we're in, because we might have this grand idea to scale and do this, but it's not fitting what the families and the youth need. So bringing them to the table, one, it builds a sense of community with the program and the families that they're serving. And two, it lets our staff know that they are professionals and that their opinions matter and that we're listening to them and taking this into account.
April, I know for you, we've talked a lot in the past about how many things your girls in the programs that you have to contribute and thoughts they have about everything. What's been important for you as you think about including their voices in when you all are thinking about how you might approach scale?
Yeah, I think one of the terms that came up when we were at the conference was respectful engagement, right? And I think for me, that's ultimately what it is about and what's so important to me and why it was critical to be a part of this is respectful engagement, right? This is a community that has been there before we came in with our new programs, our new ideas, what we think is innovative, what we think is great, what we think they may need, but we are not from that community. We are not those people. So it's very important to hear the voices of those folks before implementing, right? Just because there's a lack of resources within a community doesn't necessarily mean that they don't know how to, right? That's a very different conversation. And I think we unpacked a lot of that there. And so the only way to get to that is by having these conversations, bringing in the young people. Oh, what kind of STEM programming would you like to see, right? Talking to the school administrators that you're going into. What is happening in your school building? What are the scores looking like? What are the students saying to us about what is happening and why they are not engaging or may not be showing up, right? It allows for it to be a much more collective process that really, and as many people spoke about when we were at the conference, engagement is key, right? Students are not participating in the program, which means that you're not getting the outcomes you'd like to see. The impact is not happening, which then leads to a decrease in funding. So all of those things are very interconnected. But the more you can bring forth, like, this is actually what they'd like to see. Let's collectively collaborate on how to go about this. What's the timeline for implementing this, right? What's the right funding that we need? What's the staffing structure that we need for this? It just might not be the right time. It's really important. And I think the last piece is just, right, it's quality over quantity. So it's very important that the quality of the program is quality, right? That the students are being impacted there, and not so much that it's reaching 10,000 students. If it's not a quality program, then, what's the benefit of that?
Yeah, it's interesting because I am already hearing in both of your responses a little bit about what's been on your mind. But what are you thinking about? What have you changed? What sort of practices, right? I'm guessing we have some practical folks on the call today. What kind of things have you been changing since thinking about this more and working on the resources? Sheila, you want to go first?
Sure. Well, for me, since our tools just rolled out, having these conversations with program leaders and program staff, if you're thinking about expanding a curriculum that you're using within the program with more youth and you want to expand, asking them some of the questions from the tool. Have you had these conversations? Have you talked with the parents? Have you looked at the perimeters around your program? Are there other things that you might need to work on first before you can begin to scale this curriculum that, works so well in the after school program, and now you want to try it in summer. Well, you've got to look at a lot of different things. You've got to look at, you know, the time, the staff, the who, the what. So I've been using everything that we've been working on just to begin to have conversations. One, trying to empower program staff to speak up and have a voice. Trying to encourage program leaders to sit down and listen to those voices so that everyone feels that they have an equal footing, and encouraging program staff with different ways that they can gather this information and the insight from the youth that they're serving. So doing some youth voice and letting them know how important that is, and letting the youth know that their voices are being heard, and that the powers that be are really listening to what works and what doesn't work as far as day-to-day programming.
April, what about for you as a program leader? How's your thinking or practices evolved?
Yeah, similar to Sheila, I would say, and as I mentioned earlier, much more intentional, I think, about the work, and much more thoughtful about what programs are coming in or what's being implemented and what we're getting ready to roll out, just from a strategy, you know, from a strategic perspective. And then I think one of the exciting pieces, and this is something that I got from the conference, was like the fishbowl activity that we've been doing. It's been something that we have really worked internally to sort of develop and roll out for our young people. So helping program directors understand, how do you take this sort of format? How do you do this style of listening sessions, right? To actually engage with your young people, and not just one time a year, right? We're talking about in a very intentional, systematic way, 3-4 times a year, right? Make this quarterly. What does that look like? Yes, we do pre and post. We've started doing more focus groups that are specifically, right, highlighting students and the programs that they're working on. Also doing focus groups with the educators and the school leadership, so that we can really get a broad perspective of what is happening on the ground. But I think implementing a lot of those has led to a lot more thoughtful conversations. I would say this has been the first year that my team and I have actually like planned about 3 or 4 months in advance, which is, like, as you all know, it's not even a thing. But I think the more that you do this type of work and just unpacking and questioning, it allows for you to do more of that thoughtful prep upfront, right? And really problem solve. We do a lot of just, like, you know, I guess it would be called a SWOT analysis, but like, what's working well? What are the strengths? Like, what are the weaknesses? What are the opportunities, right? And how do we really continue to see what those challenges or threats are, and really be able you know, to overcome those. So I would say for us, it's really about implementing a lot of what we've been talking about on the ground.
Thanks for that. I can imagine, and I've heard from some folks, right? Like, whoa, right? Like, I'm a busy implementer. I'm a busy program developer, implementer director, as you all are. This sounds all real great, but like, I have a real life and a real everyday. For people who say, I don't have the time for this, we don't have the money, our grant doesn't afford this opportunity. I know in the guidelines document, there's a new way of thinking about program design process with Scale from the Start that seems like it has a lot of steps. What would you say to folks who are like, there's no way this is going to work for me in my setting? April, you want to go first?
I would say make the time, right? You don't know that something's not going to work until you do it. Yes, it is. I get it. I 100% get it, because I am running a program that scales 10,000. As we're on this call right now, I'm seeing nothing but, you know, text messages come through about different things, right? Fires that need to be put out. So I 100% get it. But I will also say, I feel like as a leader, it's allowed for me to lead a lot more, I would say, confidently, you know, like in terms of how I'm communicating, what the goals are moving forward, how we're going to get there. It makes it much more tangible for the team, right, that you are supporting. So it does take a lot, and it's not easy, right? Because I am on a leadership team. So I also, now that I've had this aha moment, I have to hopefully see that my CEO and other leads have this same aha moment. So it is work, but it's the important work, right? It's the work that we have to do in order to ensure that the type of programming that you want to see, at your sites and your programs that are being funded are actually happening, right? If we don't take the time, there will never be any time. If you don't take the time, if you don't start creating that time now, then you're going to continue to be in this cycle. And I think that's all what we really try to get out of is like, we don't want to be on this hamster wheel and cycle of like the same thing happening over and over and over, and we don't have any power or control. No, you do. And to Sheila's point, it's also about for program leaders understanding that you are the experts. You do have voice, right? You do have wisdom and experience about what has happened previously, and you have the power of the families and young people that you're serving on your side to really inform that. So you have to make the time. It's the critical part of the work.
Is you don't have to do it all at one time either. You can do it in small chunks. Let me get on my soapbox. We talk about professional development and the importance of professional development of our staff who are running the programs. This is a part of professional development. If you're having a staff meeting, set aside 10 minutes worth of time to, gather this information, and you're modeling for your staff how to set aside the 10 minutes to get the information from the youth that they're serving. So like April said, we have to do it, and you have to be intentional with your planning when you're planning meetings and staff retreats and different things like that, and beginning to incorporate this type of process into the meetings and gatherings that you're having with the staff. It's one of those things that, you just have to be intentional with it. And even if you do it in small chunks, you can still get it done.
One of the things that came up at the conference was that this is really great for program folks, for implementers, even program developers. But the perspectives of funders, researchers, evaluators, those who might be also influencing what gets funded, how it gets funded, timelines, outcomes, strategies. What would you say from your perspective are ways that people can think about bringing those folks into the conversations around, hey, how long is this grant going to be? Or, wow, can we think more loosely about what the outcomes are for this initiative? What would you say about that you all have done to help bring in those folks into conversations? Sheila, do you want to start?
Well, the first thing is not being afraid to speak up and say, whoa, wait a minute. Before we take those steps, here's some other things that we might need to do to sort of guide us along the way. Unfortunately, sometimes when we have a person, an entity, a program who says, oh my gosh, I love what you're doing and I want to give you $5 million. We're excited because we all know that, that would be a lot of money to do a lot of really cool things with it. But before we accept the check, we've got to sit down and talk with them about this is who we are. This is who we're serving. This is what we hope this is how we hope to impact our youth and our families. And with what you're giving me, can we do this if we are incorporating, and this would be some of the information that you're gathering from your staff and your families. We just have to be comfortable telling the powers that be, hold up, before we go there, here's some things that we need to talk about. And when I say comfortable, we can't be afraid that they might walk away with that funding. And you have to sort of come to a place, well, if they walked away, maybe it wasn't for us because it doesn't really fit the families and the communities that we're serving.
I'm just reading in the chat, there's a similar question around making the case for this type of community-centered focus. April, why don't you talk a little bit about what you've done to do that?
Yeah, I would say similar, right, to what Sheila talked about. It is the idea that you have to, right, we're intentionally plugging in these things. And so when I came back from the conference, it was like this, I had all these ideas in my head, had to figure out the timing and the best timing to start rolling things out. But I think the more that I sat with it and came up with the why behind why it was so important to how it was informing the work, it allowed for me to then say, all right, I can put this in a way that folks are able to understand. So what that looked like was, I need my programs team and my development team to really be talking more strategically about the grants that are being funded. I might have been frustrated by what was being written that seemed not so much like what was happening on the ground, right? It's like, where did this language come from? What is this? Who are these students? Like, that's not really how it worked. And so in order to get through that frustration, we had to just, have the conversation. We had to just begin engaging. And, we have this I don't know if some of my team members on the call, but sometimes they're like, oh, this was a little bit of a hard conversation. It's like, yeah, but we had to have this level of conflict in order to get to the next side. And now, as a result of us having this little bit of conflict, and maybe it was a bit of tension, we actually have come up with a better system strategy that even for development, you can now communicate to the funders in terms of what it is that we need and why we might have said we actually want to do something a little bit different, right? And I think the same with funders. One of the things that I have learned this year, and it was, a great thanks to one of our chief development officers, is that funders are actually a lot more collaborative than we think. They are looking for this level of conversation. They're looking for that pushback, right? They're looking for you to say, this isn't going to work because of this reason. And this is actually what I need you to fund. I've found that we've had, now not all, I'm going to preface that by saying not all, but I have found so many of our funders this year, just because we were just honest and not so fearful and used our voices to say what we needed, that they were like, we want to do that too. Like, I love that. Let me connect you with so-and-so, or this is a great starting place. Oh, this is another fund that we're starting. How about tapping into here, right? It opens up so many other doors that you may not have even thought about just based on having this conversation alone and bringing them in, right? A very real example that I'll end with is, we were having a conversation with a funder about a STEM program to be scaled in New York City and DC, and it didn't get funded, right? And what the funder came back and said to us was, really, this is not this. One, where's the equity in this? We're not sure how this is going to roll out. The models are kind of different from one place to the other. And when I had the conversation with them, it was like, yeah, this is actually the work that we've been doing, right? With National Girls Collaborative Project. There's so much great work here. And I will tell you that now we're starting from scratch. And they're like, all right, let's go in that vein. Let's actually pump the brakes. My idea to them was, let's actually take this model and let's test it out in schools, right? And let's use that. Let's do these fish bowls. Let's do these focus groups. Let's do these listening sessions. And that's actually what's going to get funded, right? Is for us to actually do that level of the work. So it is possible, but you won't know until you have those conversations that sometimes might be hard.
And I just want to throw in again, it might mean having a training before you can do this with your staff who work directly with youth, to train them how to have these conversations, one, amongst themselves and with the youth and families. We've got to give them professional development. We've got to give them the tools that they need to be successful to do this in order to get that input.
I think that was one of the coolest parts about the collaborative tool, is that it really was written for whoever wanted to take it and use it and adapt it to whatever they're setting. Just want to give a shout out to all of our funding colleagues out there who are and who do want to be a part of these processes, because I know a lot of you are out there and appreciate the efforts that you have. Let's turn it over to the Q&A, Tara.
Yeah.
And see if we have some questions from the audience. I know there's got to be things that people are thinking and wondering, or things that they want to share.
Absolutely. I actually want to circle back to Janelle's comment about the bringing in the community center focus into conversations with funders. I know we talked a lot about how this tool might help. I want to hear a little bit more about how we can bring in youth and families and funders together. Is that something that you've done? How do you think this tool can help in that vein?
I mean, I do think it's possible. I just talked about sort of some of those activities or exercises, right? It is about the time, right? And I know that's the biggest lever for people and factor is having time and where do you incorporate it, right? I would say an easy first step is we're at the end of a program year, leveraging like the end of a school year, summer to really gauge those responses from your young people, from their parents, having like a community listening session, something that's fun that doesn't just seem like they're going to be talked at the entire time, but you want to pitch it in a way that's like, we're looking to get this level of input and advice from you based on what it is you'd like to see next year, right? I'm having a lot of those conversations now with a lot of our school leaders. It's just really an end of year wrap up. How has it been going? What would you like to see? All of that then informs what happens next year, what I take back to the funders. In funder conversations, it's happening kind of similarly as they're thinking, as they're asking, what are your plans for FY25, right? Those are the times that you can really start plugging in a lot of those and carving out time to have those conversations.
I think that's really great. And it makes me think about your first comment about respectful engagement and really moving away from performative engagement to meaningful and respectful engagement. And I think this tool can help in that way, because I don't think the questions are performative. I think they really are meant to be digging at the root of some of these equity issues. We had a question as well come through in the Q&A. How did you choose collaborators for the development of the tools, and how did you recruit them? Emily, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I actually was not around. I was on maternity leave when it happened, but I can talk a little bit about it. And then Erin, you or Tara can jump in.
You're right. So there was two co-collaborators. First, we chose co-collaborators for the conference development, and then so whoever wants to take it, go ahead.
Let's start with the conference, because I think the products like that was a little bit more organic. But for the conference, the collaborators who attended that, we did a snowball survey essentially to we know a lot of people who have scaled programs. We've worked with a lot of people who have developed programs, who have researched. We worked with many funders who have funded scaled programs. So we knew a lot of people, but we wanted to go beyond that circle and think about people we didn't know, program developers we didn't know, and especially implementers, people who are doing this work every day that we were not familiar with. So we did a snowball survey and asked the people we knew to recommend people that they knew who might be interested in this topic. And then for the products, for the next set of collaborators, we chose, we did a interest survey to everyone who was involved with the conference, who attended the conference, to see who would be interested in co-developing these resources. And there were a lot of people who were interested. So we ultimately sort of, figured out what those three groups would be to help us develop the guidelines, the tool, and then to review the products as well. And I also want to say that we also gave the entire group who attended the conference a chance to see the tool and the guidelines before they were released, and provide any feedback if they had any thoughts on them as well. We really wanted to make sure everyone felt like they had a say in what these resources turned into, especially because all of the conversations came from them originally. So
yeah, I'll just add that it was really important for us to implement what we were learning at the conference, to stay true to the guidelines for equitable development as we were developing these. So it was a learning process, and I think we learned a lot at sort of like big picture for this project about co-development and co-design with people, and we'd love to talk more about that as well. It's sort of like separate to the scaling guidelines, but that was emerged as a really central part of this project, was the co-development and this community that we've been building around equitable scaling.
I'll just add, and I think for those of you who might be thinking about doing community-based listening sessions, as April was talking about, or it was really important to us that we thought within the size of our grant, let's be honest, how we could compensate people for their time in their contributions and things like that. So the products are co-authored. We were able to provide stipends here and there for people to participate. It was just important, right? As we think about equity, we don't want to be extractive in the process of trying to bring community in, of trying to bring collaborators in. And so like that is something we know we have realities of resources and budgets and all that. But I think it is something for folks to think about as you think about who you might bring in and then how you allocate resources for people's time and expertise.
Thank you, Erin. I actually have another question from you for you in the Q&A. How do we engage with program evaluators? We have tried numerous times, but have been unsuccessful. And Kevin, I don't know if you want to just follow up in the chat with what do you mean by engage? Develop evaluation plans together? I don't know, Erin, if you want to just start talking about that. And I put it on Erin because Erin is an evaluator. Erin has been our historic evaluator on so many grants, but if anyone else would like to weigh in, please do so as well.
Yeah, I can start. And if Kevin, if I don't answer your question in terms of what you mean by engage, please refine. I mean, I think it depends on the perspective of your evaluation consultants or whoever you're bringing in, or if you have an internal person, but really bringing them in from the beginning when you are thinking about it. So if you look at the revised planning process, there's a strip that runs up the side where your funder should be involved and engaged in these conversations from the beginning, but so should your researchers and your evaluators. It is complicated to think about scaling from an evaluation standpoint. If you are thinking about redefining outcomes at different spaces, if you're thinking about how, the program might focus on flexibility instead of fidelity, right? Those are things that we struggle with from the evaluation field. But if that is set from the beginning, your plan is then set from the beginning. It is harder from an evaluation standpoint to think about how do I account for all of the adaptation that's been going on, or the fact that some people are using the popsicle sticks for art when they're supposed to be creating this scientific project, right? Like that is all hard as well. So I think it is involving your evaluator and getting them engaged and having them be a part of embedding these data collection activities that Sheila and April have been talking about. Maybe they could help you design what the questions are that the implementers are asking. So there's a lot of ways to use the evaluator slightly differently than just the outside person who is saying whether it's good or bad.
And I would just say, and also making sure the evaluator knows exactly who is in the program, knows the community, knows the youth, knows the staff, and knows what their capabilities are, and where there might be gaps in either delivery or implementation or something along those lines. But just making sure the evaluators get the full picture of who they are working with.
Yeah, and I'll just follow up with something that Janelle also said in the chat is engaging researchers in a similar way, shifting the way that we are conceptualizing research, moving more towards participant observers, co-designed, co-developed research. And we talked a lot about outcomes at the conference because I think sometimes the outcomes, when they're defined by the developers or by the funders, that is a lot of times where the inequitable practices stem from because they're so rigid. And so evaluators and researchers can help to design a project that has these flexible outcomes. I think you just have to talk to each other and think about that a little bit more. Any other questions in the chat? Maybe we have time for one or two more and then we'll wrap up. All right, if there's no more questions, I think we'll end with our final question for our panelists. Erin, I'll let you ask that.
All right, so for the folks who are still on the call today, what's one thing, Sheila and April, that somebody could do today, looking at these guidelines and the tool? What's one thing they could do today to start changing how they either think or implement scaling at their site? Sheila, you want to start first?
Just go back and have one conversation with one person in your organization. That's it, just one conversation. What do you think about this? And let that be the beginning of hopefully other conversations that will happen between you and whether it's researchers, evaluators, families, but just one conversation today.
I would have said that same thing, Sheila, but given that you've taken that one, I will say, I think a good place to start is actually using the resources that are in the toolkit. I would say if I was in this position right now, I would definitely look at that where do you start, right? Like, what are the conversations to be having? Who are the folks that you would bring into those conversations, just to familiarize your own self with what the process is and what it is that we were talking about. Because I know a lot of questions are like, this might not be for me. You know, we don't have the time, the resources, but I think it's a very quick 1 page. I think looking at it and just spending a little bit of time and then asking yourself where you are in your program and whether or not this tool could be helpful is a really good place to start, because it's not overwhelming and it allows for you to take that pause that's really necessary in order to be able to sort of make sense of it for yourself and then say, this is how we can actually implement it, you know, at our site or within our program.
Thank you so much, Sheila and April, for your insights and your time and your expertise. Thank you, Erin, for leading such a wonderful discussion, and Emily for guiding us through the resources today. I think my takeaway for everyone is to, spend a little time and read the resources and do a little self-reflecting, challenge notions and assumptions that you might have about scale and see where the resources take you. As a reminder, this webinar will be shared out and with the slides after, and we're going to be putting a link to a survey in the chat. So please, if you would complete that just to let us know your thoughts. All of this is really helpful. As I said, this is the start of this conversation. We are advancing it. We are not completing it. There's so much more work to be done. And we hope that you will come along with us. So thank you so much. And we will enjoy the rest of your day. We will see you soon.